I'm 76 years old, and I need to tell you something that took me 5 decades to figure out. Not a dramatic something, not a bankruptcy, not a scam, not a bad investment, nothing that would make a good story at a dinner party. That's actually the whole point. What cost me $200,000 was something so quiet, so ordinary, so invisible, that I never even knew it was happening. And the worst part, I was proud of it. Every single day for 40 years, I was proud of the habit that was quietly draining me. I thought I was being smart. I wasn't. My name is Frank Donnelly. I spent 40 years as an electrical technician and then a maintenance supervisor out in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. I wasn't a wealthy man. Nobody in my family was, but I was careful. Every paycheck, without fail, I'd take a portion off the top and move it straight into my savings account. Sometimes I'd tuck cash into envelopes at home, tangible, real, something I could hold. I had a little budget notebook, green cover, spiral bound, and every morning before the house woke up, I'd sit at the kitchen table going through the numbers, categories for everything, and always, at the top, savings. I was religious about it. It was a ritual that meant something. I felt like I was honoring a commitment every time I made that deposit. I called it being responsible. My father called it being smart. He used to say, "Frank, the stock market is a casino. The house always wins." He'd watched his own father lose money in the Depression and never forgot it. That image got passed down to me the way eye color gets passed down. Not chosen, just inherited. I carried that warning around for 50 years like a shield. It wasn't a shield. It was an anchor. The number grew. Slowly, the way a savings account grows. 0.5% interest, sometimes less, but bigger at the end of every year than the start, and that felt like progress. I watched the 1990s bull run from a distance, watched the dot-com crash, the 2008 collapse. Every time I felt a quiet satisfaction. Not me. I wasn't in that casino. My money was safe. By the time I was 65, I had $218,000, more than my father ever saw in one place. I thought I'd done it right. Then I met Danny Kowalski. Danny was 34, worked with me in maintenance for a few years. Good worker, sharp kid. One afternoon in the break room he mentions, just in passing, that he just hit $180,000 in his 401k. I took a sip of my coffee, said something like, "Good for you, kid," went back to work, but I couldn't shake it. This kid, half my age, had built nearly what I had, and he wasn't done yet. By the time Danny was my age, he'd have somewhere around $600,000, maybe more. I drove home that night and did something I'd never let myself do before. I ran the numbers honestly, not what I had, what I could have had if I'd taken those same monthly deposits and put them into a basic index fund at 7% average annual return over 40 years. I would have had somewhere north of $400,000 by retirement. I had $218,000. I didn't lose the difference in a crash. I didn't lose it to a scammer. I just never had it because I was so afraid of risk that I never gave my money the chance to work. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I know what some of you are thinking. The market is risky. People lose everything. What about 2008? Risk is real. I'm not dismissing it. Markets fall hard and stay down, and it feels like the floor is gone. That's true. But doing nothing is also a risk. A savings account at 0.5% while inflation runs at 2, 3, 4% isn't safety. It's a slow bleed. You can't feel it on any particular Tuesday, but over 40 years it hollows you out in a way that only becomes visible when you finally stop and look at the numbers directly. I can tell you what it looks like by the time you see it. It looks like working part-time at 76 because you have to, not because you want to. It looks like selling your fishing boat. 11 years I had that thing. Took it out on Roosevelt Lake. Loved it in the uncomplicated way you love something that asks nothing of you except to show up. because the unexpected expenses keep coming and the cushion isn't thick enough. It looks like watching friends take their grandchildren to places you always talked about going while you sit with a spreadsheet. It looks like a retirement that's smaller than the one you earned. That's what doing nothing costs. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like caution. But it is a decision, and it has consequences just as real and just as permanent as any reckless one. My father's warning wasn't entirely wrong. The stock market is a casino if you treat it like one. Picking stocks on tips, timing the market, chasing something dramatic. Yes, you can lose everything. But that's not what I was being offered every payday for 40 years. What I was being offered was the chance to put money into a boring, diversified fund and leave it completely alone. Not gamble, not speculate. Just set it running and get out of the way. I was so afraid of the dramatic risk that I never looked at the quiet one, guarding the front door while the money slipped out the back, every month for 4 decades. My father was trying to protect me in the only language he had. I understand that. But his warning was built for a world without 401ks, without index funds. And by the time those tools existed and were available to ordinary working people like me, I was already too locked into a belief I'd never thought to question. I never stopped to ask whether the old rules still applied. I just followed them. I've got a neighbor named Clarence. He's 80. Retired comfortably about 10 years ago. One evening, not long after the Danny conversation, I told him what I'd figured out, expected him to be kind about it. He wasn't. He said, "Frank, I tried to tell you. Years ago, when we were both putting kids through school, you said your father told you the market was gambling, and that was the end of the conversation." I said, "I know." He said your father also thought seatbelts were uncomfortable. I laughed. Then I felt the sting of it. He was right. I had taken one piece of advice from one man in one era and worn it for 50 years like permanent truth. Never held it up to the light. Never asked whether it still fit. That's the thing about inherited habits. They don't announce themselves as habits. They announce themselves as common sense. And you don't question common sense. Common sense is just the water you swim in, until one night at the kitchen table when the numbers tell you something the water never did. This isn't just a video about money. The $200,000 I left on the table, I know that number cold. What's harder to calculate is what it would have actually meant, not as an abstraction, as a life. It would have meant retiring fully at 65 instead of still patching hours together at 76. It would have meant not selling the boat. It would have meant that when the furnace went out last winter and cost me $4,000, I wouldn't have felt it the way I felt it, like a stone dropped in a shallow pool. It would have meant freedom, not luxury, just freedom. And here's the quiet cruelty of it. I did everything I was supposed to do. Showed up every day for 40 years. Never spent beyond my means. Saved faithfully and never wavered. By every measure I understood, I did it right, and I still ended up with half of what I could have had, because the habit that felt most responsible, the deposit made, the number ticking up, the quiet satisfaction of the ritual, was the very thing working against me the whole time. All that discipline, all that consistency, all that pride, pointed in the wrong direction. If I could sit across from my 22-year-old self, I wouldn't lecture him. I'd put 2 pieces of paper on the table. Left side, your savings account, 0.5% interest, 40 years of deposits. Right side, a basic index fund, 7% average return, same deposits, same 40 years. I'd let him read it, because the fear driving my habit wasn't stupidity or laziness. It was real fear with a real origin. And you can't argue someone out of fear, but you can show them what it costs. Nobody ever did that for me. I'm doing it for you now. Whatever you're setting aside each month, $100, $300, $500, whatever you can manage. The question isn't whether to save it. Please, save it. Keep your emergency fund somewhere accessible and safe. That part my father wasn't wrong about. But the money beyond that, the money you won't touch for 20 or 30 years, that money sitting in a low-interest account isn't resting. It's losing ground. quietly, every year, invisibly, until the day you sit down and finally add it all up. I was careful my entire working life, more careful than most people I knew, and I still left $200,000 behind. Not because I made a bad decision, because I made no decision at all, because I let fear dress itself up as prudence for 50 years and never looked closely enough to see the difference. I'm 76. I work part-time and I manage. My life is good in the ways that matter. But I think about the boat. I think about the trip to the Pacific Northwest I kept saying I'd take. Some of those things still happen, in smaller versions. Not all of them. The math is running right now, in whichever direction you've pointed it. Not loudly, just steadily every single day, adding up to something you won't see clearly until you're sitting where I'm sitting. Point it somewhere worth going. The only move that cost me everything was waiting. Don't make that one.